Break out the carrot sticks and natural yogurt, no artificial hormones added. It's time for the Doctor's Nutrition Show. Dr. Lewis and Janet have a long history of helping people achieve their maximum potential. While Janet is a certified natural health consultant with a unique perspective of alternative and complementary nutrition, Dr. Lewis stays current on the latest research pertaining to nutritional supplements and optimum health. Paramount to their educational journey was their trip to China while studying Chinese medical doctors. Dr. Lewis and Janet know the importance of proper nutrition in the healing process and maintenance of the human body. Get ready to gain a healthy perspective on life. This is the Doctor's Nutrition Show.
On today's show, we have Dr. Stephen Lewis and Janet Lewis. Dr. Lewis is a chiropractor. They have a long history of helping people achieve their maximum potential. Dr. Lewis stays current on the latest research pertaining to nutritional supplements and optimal health. Janet is a certified natural health consultant with a unique perspective on alternative and complementary nutrition from studying with numerous national leading alternative health experts. Paramount in their education was their trip to China while studying with traditional Chinese medical doctors. Dr. Lewis and Janet know the importance of proper nutrition in the healing process and the maintenance of the human body. After seeing a growing public need, they teamed up with Doctor's Nutrition to offer extremely low-cost blood work to determine the most appropriate nutritional products that are only available through a doctor's office. So welcome to the show, Dr. Lewis and Janet.
Well, thank you for having us.
Good to be here.
All the way from Texas, right?
I know.
You bet.
Big state.
Yeah. Did you both grow up in Texas?
Yes, I grew up close to Dallas and Fort Worth. My husband here is from East Texas in a little town called Hugh Springs.
Yeah, well, East Texas redneck, rural.
I spent 10 years in the South in Alabama and Mississippi and Kentucky, and I do note a slight accent in both of you.
Yeah, and he's got the mustache and the boots and the whole Texas thing going.
Yeah, I saw the picture. Yeah, that's awesome. Janet, why don't we start with you? You want to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about the Natural Health Consult?
Yes, Dr. Lewis is the brains of the operation. I am the one who got to experience a lot of it physically. So together, I guess we formed Doctor's Nutrition from me having some health problems, from him always being in nutrition and being even more interested in it after I went through a hysterectomy at age 35. I'm just slightly older than that now, but won't say.
Yeah, she's 32.
Yeah.
Going the medical route after the surgery, I gained a whole lot of weight. I was very tired and realized there had to be something different. So we found Doctor's Nutrition and learned about the low-cost lab work and ran that and realized that I was missing a lot of things nutritionally. And thank goodness my husband's smart enough to put it together and tell me what that was.
All right, Dr. Lewis?
She humors me. Actually, Janet is very incredibly intelligent. Yeah, what we've done, we try the natural approach, and we tell people, we have the best medical profession in the world, which I definitely do believe. And, the medical profession has saved my bacon more than once. But there's something missing with America being so sick and, on most scales we're the dead last in overall health, but in spite of a good medical profession. So what's missing in our diet? My daddy died early at 53, complications from ulcerative colitis and things that are generally pretty easily fixed through natural medicine. That was kind of my wake-up call. I was 15 when Daddy died, and it's like, well, that kind of was traumatic, so I tried to learn natural medicine, and it's amazing when the chiropractors and osteopaths and medical doctors work together, and we treat a massive amount of nurses and a few medical doctors and their families, and I think there's room for both, and I think each one can help the other one be more effective. So we kind of have a good relationship there. Yeah, I was always a chiropractor, and although I was very successful at that, my major emphasis was more into nutrition, and I just see people bloom when you put nutrients in the body and what the body can do with it, because our food is just not nutrient dense, even compared to the 1970s. and it's full of chemicals, things that are not healthy. And, we have some clients like one in London. I said, well, for your allergies, you need to quit eating this, 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 and this. He said, stop, doc. He said, we don't eat that stuff in England. We don't even let some of those genetically modified organisms in the country. And I said, yeah, okay. So the lack of health in America, I think, is a multifaceted thing that we can, visit different areas about. Well, it's nutrition, or it's toxins, or it's the consumerism, and we get too hurried and have lost our sense of humor. So, we just approach it from whatever the patient seems to need, and good health can be had. You just kind of have to go down a little bit different path.
Talk a little bit about your trip to China and studying with the Chinese medical doctors, and how has that influenced the way you practice?
Well, we took a lot of different courses, here in America, and when we did go, it was it's pretty interesting. Part of it was just sightseeing and seeing the Great Wall and the Terracotta Warriors, Xi'an, the Forbidden City. Had lunch in their equivalent of the White House, and then we flew off to a governor's mansion in a different province. But there were a lot of courses given by Chinese medical doctors, traditional Chinese medicine. We went to Beijing Teaching Hospital and kind of looked around there, and went to the world's oldest herbal pharmacy, which was really incredible. I think they started that in 1600s. But they look at things much differently than we do. They will not check pulse to check heart rate, but they'll see if it's thin and thready. They'll look at your eyes. They'll look at your hands. They'll look at your tongue. And it's amazing what the body will tell you if we just knew what to look at. Yeah, kind of simply put, they think conditions can be hot or cold or wet or dry. And then when you determine what the problem is, it's too wet, for example, they will give you herbs that have the nutrients in it to allow your body to dry up the condition. It's definitely interesting, and I think we should blend it even more than we do with Western medicine, because China has a really good blend of traditional versus Western. They do a good job of that.
I think that the Eastern medicine is pretty fascinating because it's been around for so long.
Right.
Curing people for a long time before, Western medicine. So when did you go to China?
It's been about 10 years ago.
Yeah. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was right before we got involved with Doctor's Nutrition, because I, at that time, was overweight and trying to walk around China, and I thought something's really wrong here, and they were talking to me in Chinese. And he talked about the wet condition. Well, that's more like the tired and no energy type thing, and that's what they kept telling me. They're just like, you need energy. I thought, I do need energy.
Well, she says she was overweight. That's a relative term.
Well,
maybe 15 pounds.
Well, I went from a size 6 to a size 12 in a year. So to me, that was overweight. I didn't carry it well.
Me working in the hospital, I know that the labs are very expensive, and a lot of doctors, they look at certain testing more from a treatment standpoint. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did you come to start the company, and what caused you to think about offering these lower cost labs?
Well, basically, we, Dr. Lewis takes tons of seminars, and they always discuss doing functional medicine, basically what it's called. But the concept was, if we take the barriers down, we're able to help a whole lot more people get well.
We have friends that practice this also, and
right,
kind of took us under their wing. Right. The thing about it is, I always defend the medical profession. Being in natural medicine, we get people in that are anti-medical, and I said, no, you should never do that. Your doctor is not the issue. Your hospital's not the issue. It's just that they have their hands tied within parameters of standard of care or what the insurance company will allow. And so that's where you see not enough lab work done, and people say sometimes, well, you do too much lab work. I said, well, you've had $10,000 worth, and it has not uncovered the problem. So when I take lab work, I throw a big net. It's kind of a fishing analogy, but so what that I give it away at cost? I don't make that much money, and I give my time away. It's like, you just buy your supplements from me, because supplements have such a huge difference in quality and the variations and all that. So
we just basically wanted to take the guesswork out of what they needed for nutrition, instead of being like the the neighbor down the road that said, well, it worked for Aunt Mary, go try a bottle of it, and it, may or may not work for you. The lab work shows us exactly what's missing with nutrition. And then the supplements that we use are pharmaceutical grade, which means they will actually move the lab values.
They actually have to have third-party verification. It has to be within 5% of what it says on the label, where one of the studies I read said with vitamin D, it can be 20-something% of what's on the label, or 140-something percent. It's like, well, that and most vitamin D, doesn't really work that well. So, and it has to do with GI function and what your uptake can be. So, there's so many different variables. So that when we check so many different things, you can say, well, okay, your thyroid's not where it should be, but is that an adrenal additional problem with the adrenal glands being stressed? Because they have that adrenal thyroid axis you have to consider.
Yeah, I was just at the doctor maybe 4 or 5 months ago doing my annual physical, and I work in the hospital. I hadn't realized they used to just order a bunch of tests, and this time he's like, I'm not really going to order any labs because insurance companies don't pay for them anymore. So that even kind of came as a surprise to me, because they used to just order CBCs and, counts and all that, but they are really tied by what the insurance companies allow. I pulled up one of your panels, and so if we can talk real quick about not the importance of every single one, but so you have you have CBC with differentials, CMP, lipids, thyroid, C-reactive protein, which I hear a lot about, A1C, iron panels, vitamin Ds. What would you consider the key tests that you would always order somebody to get a baseline?
Well, again, I have to order a lot. One of the things we deal with is, on the CBC, you look at the neutrophils and lymphocytes, and, they should be in a certain ratio, not in the reference range off to the right, because that reference range covers the majority of America. And just because it's common does not mean it's optimal or healthy. And there are so many people that come in, well, their neutrophils over a period of months or years have gone down, their lymphocytes come up, and it's usually a viral pattern, that can be Epstein-Barr or mono or the cytomegalovirus. And then if the monocytes are very high, monocytes generally should be under a 7. If they're high and stay high, that would indicate probable allergies and inflammation. Eosinophils, for example, that's a white blood cell that comes out when you have digestive incompetence or food allergies or sensitivities to the chemicals in our environment. There are many, many, many chemicals that's interfering with proper function. So, and we test cortisol, because who's not stressed? Whether it's chemical stress or financial stress, there's so many different stressors. We check that. That should be in a more optimal range. We do about 5 parts of the thyroid. I cannot tell by just TSH, the stimulating hormone, what's happening with the thyroid. And from a natural point of view, the things that interfere with thyroid function are the plastics and pesticides, or the chlorines, or the bromines, or the fluoride in your toothpaste. And so if the TSH, generally it should go low, but the one that's, I think, most important is free T3, the active hormone.
And
I think.
Oh, go ahead, Jen.
I think many times they test just the TSH, which is the brain getting a signal, and the true thyroid function is in the free T3. So many times we find they actually need thyroid, or have been given too much thyroid based on the TSH. So that's why we like to run the different parts.
Or C-reactive protein. The Cleveland Clinic, which is, I know, arguably the best, the best heart clinic in America. I'm sorry to say that, but, I said arguably. But they think that the C-reactive protein, the high sensitivity one, is about 4 times better indicator of a future heart attack and stroke than your cholesterol levels. And I personally think the cholesterol levels are artificially low, the reference ranges, because cholesterol is important in rebuilding the brain. It's important in making hormones. It's important in every cell in the body. So you have to be careful about wanting to lower it without checking, is there enough inflammation to make it stick in the first place? And we can go further with the cholesterol testing to get into the apolipoprotein A and B, or the particle sizes. The sizes are more important than the numbers in itself, but I never interfere with what the medical profession does because that's not my training, but we can add nutrients and make great changes and decrease, say, the inflammation from a C-reactive protein.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hear a lot of typically women that have thyroid issues, and I see you have written a book, Thyroid Sniper. Is that such a big problem that you decided to write a book about it?
Well, yeah, it's a huge problem, and it's not just women, but I think women actually pay attention to their bodies much better than men. That's why they outlive us, and they're prettier than we are. But, I've read dozens and dozens and dozens of thyroid books, and Janet says, well, you need to quit recommending all these different books and write your own. And I said, okay, no big deal. Well, I got into it, and basically, I'm more of a shoot straight kind of guy. It's like, well, here's the nutritional deficiencies that can add to a thyroid problem or not being in optimal range. Here are the plastics, pesticides, the MSG, the additives. It's lack of zinc and selenium and tyrosine and iodine. And then I went into the Hashimoto's, the autoimmune disease. And I said, some of the books out there say you should never give a person with Hashimoto's disease iodine. Other books say you can give them 50 to 75 milligrams, which is a massive dose of iodine. So I said in this very short book, what you have to do is look for a medical and or natural practitioner that can balance it, because it's not either or. You're an individual and you should be treated as such.
On the thyroid, though, do you find that actually maybe just not the thyroid, just overall, do people comply with your recommendations? I'm guessing if they come to you, they're looking for new recommendations, but in general, it doesn't seem like compliance is that great, so that people continue to experience health problems and they kind of know the answer. What's your take on that?
Do y'all have that issue also?
Yeah. I mean, I always like to say, we now have wheelchairs that are accommodate 1,000-pound patients, and I think that kind of sums it up.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Our issue is that they always look it up on Google and tell us what's wrong with them.
Yeah, that is so. Well, I thought we were supposed to bring in our Google printout.
Yeah.
Right. We do have some compliance problems. Some people, really jump on it and say, "Can you add another supplement? Can you add another one? Can you add another one?" And then you have the ones that want it instantly, because we've become a society that wants instant results, even though it takes God 9 months to make a baby, but they expect us to pull it off in 3 weeks. We say, well, you're looking for a miracle. Then you have people that don't love themselves enough to, they'll know that's the answer, but they don't really love themselves enough to help create the outcome. So yes, there is a compliance problem. We talked to some medical doctors, and I'll be frustrated. And they said, listen, most of them don't even fill our prescriptions, much less take them as directed.
Yeah, that is actually one of the major problems we have with patients that we discharge out of the hospital. They don't get prescriptions out of the ED either, and then they'll end up back in the hospital. But I would just think, though, if somebody is reaching out to you through your website and looking for this, then they probably would be more compliant. Speaking of, you mentioned GI problems, and, working in a hospital, there's a lot of business people and stressed out nurses. And how does stress, anxiety affect GI issues?
They quit going to the bathroom. I'm always famous for this. That's one of the first things we ask someone is, how many meals a day are you eating? And most of them will tell us 3. And then we'll say, well, how many bowel movements are you having a day? And so many people have 1 or none a day, and they'll go, oh, I go every couple of days. And I tell them, well, if you had 3 trains that go through a tunnel, how many should come out on the other side?
Yeah, that's a great.
And if they're not coming out, then where did they go? Which is the bigger problem. So, and I try to tell them all of it goes to organ health. And you talk about nurses, and many of them come in and go, we just don't have time to go. We're on shift work, and we just can't take the time. So a lot of it starts, then when they're young, in school, they don't get time to go, and you start making pockets in that colon, and then they start having health issues because that all goes to organs.
And then you guys have to treat them for diverticulitis. there's so many challenges to gut health, and I try to make the analogy of, your GI tract has everything to do with stress, anxiety, and depression. I actually gave that talk to a big medical group here in Longview. Stress, anxiety, and depression is not all in your head, and I referenced it with medical research, and the MDs and PhDs and psychiatrists and dentists came up and said, man, you're absolutely, wow, where'd you come from? I said, I've been here very, very quietly, just taking care of people and using your research. There's so much research out there about neurotransmitters, and most of us have impaired digestion anyway. We don't really produce hydrochloric acid. Most of us that think we have high HCl actually have low HCl, and that's from, to a large degree, lack of digestive enzymes because of the plastics and pesticides and because of wheat. There's a study that says wheat can cause schizophrenia, and I tell people if you just give up anything containing gluten, there's many, many people that get well. So we don't digest real well, and then it doesn't sterilize what comes in there, and then the virus, yeast, and fungus can go on in further down and set up shop. So it's a intestinal dysbiosis or too much candida usually, and it can be as simple as, there's a good research that talks about cow's milk. If you consume it for a long time, actually increases permeability, and that actually is counteracted by the lactobacillus probiotic you talk about. And, that's from Journal of Gastroenterology. It's a really good study. There's so many different ones. There's ones that talk about lack of B complex, and they say, well, but I'm eating my greens. Yeah, okay, you live in Texas, but you're getting your greens shipped from California, and it's sprayed with Roundup. So there's a problem there that challenges the good bacteria in your GI tract. So, it's a multitude of different problems that cascades in, and, like the candida, they will pretty much prevent GABA, dopamine, serotonin, et cetera, because we have a nation full of stressed and depressed people. So look to the GI tract, assimilation of nutrients, and the inability to eliminate properly, like Janet said.
Gas, bloating, belching.
Yeah.
That's how you know you've got the problem.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, so what is the typical number of bowel movements you should have a day? I was just curious from your comment about 3.
Well, if you're eating 3 meals, you should be going 3 times a day. You should be going within 30 minutes to an hour after a meal.
I think you just shocked every listener right now.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's exactly where everything starts. And then the rest of these problems generally come from that was never taken care of.
A couple questions about what you were talking about. Is gluten sensitivity becoming more accepted? Because, a few years ago it was more of a conspiracy theory, but it seems that gluten intolerance is more mainstream now. Are people understanding that come to you?
Well, I think the doctors are becoming more aware of it, and there's more research that proves that it's true. But, we have to understand that the way we fertilize our food with the NPK actually stops the plant from chelating and uptaking calcium and magnesium and potassium, et cetera, et cetera. I've been on some pretty big podcasts and we kind of had this friendly argument about whether wheat was genetically modified or not. And these people that are much more knowledgeable about agricultural practices than me said, gluten's only 4 times higher than it used to be just a few decades ago. Well, if you look at what gluten does to the microvilli of the intestines and how that impedes nutrient uptake, some of the research actually says there's 40 times more gluten in wheat than there was back in the 1970s. So yes, it's becoming more mainstream, but I think the doctors are seeing more of the celiac and Crohn's disease and things like that, or even mild gluten intolerance. And some of that's genetically driven. I don't like to interpret genetic testing because that's a little bit over my head, but there's some really good genetic testing that talks about gluten intolerance, and we have it to different degrees. And now our society has about 50% of us have a broken gene called 5-MTHFR, the 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, but to different degrees depending on which gene. I've got one genetic SNP on 677, so that can lead to gluten intolerance on the same token can lead to stress, depression, obesity, many types of cancer, fibromyalgia, obesity, and the inability to lose weight. I mean, that MTHFR gene can cause all sorts of problems, including infertility. It just goes on, and it takes a person, you were talking about compliance, it kind of takes them to be willing to say, I'm going to get off Google and let my doctor lead me, because that's one of the problems in America is we've become a nation that's so full of knowledge but not understanding and wisdom. And I have to tell people every day, one of my heroes is Einstein, and Einstein said something to the effect of, you can't fix the problem with the same consciousness you had when you created the problem. And people are taken aback by that. It's like, well, I think I'm pretty smart, but I'm not smart enough to fix my own problems. Like Janet Google one time, we were in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and I went on to bed, and she wasn't feeling good, and woke up the next morning. She said, I found out my problem. I got on Dr. Google. I said, great. What's the issue? She said, I have prostate cancer. So I tell people, stay off Google.
Oh, my strategy is if I have a headache and the first thing that pops up says I have a brain tumor, I just go to find something until it just says don't worry about it, and then I'm good. Yeah, that's my theory. Yeah, I know. That's
a good one.
It can actually put you in panic if going on Google, because it's always, I think people are just tuned into the worst case scenario. But that's funny. So this is a low carb podcast, and it sounds like you're definitely anti-grain. What's your nutritional approach?
Well, that's the big thing. We tell them to stay away from grain. And they're like, okay, well, I don't really eat bread, but, I'm having cereal in the morning. And
they think macaroni and cheese is a vegetable.
Noodles. So we tell them no pasta, rice, bread, potatoes. And we try to tell them to eat like the farmers used to eat the lean meats and vegetables, and shop around the outside edges of the store and stay out of the middle.
Yeah, that's what I say too. Exactly. I agree with everything you're saying, and I'm going to get back to this concern with plastics, but I try to buy organic and local vegetables, yes. And I don't think people realize that your bright red strawberries that came from wherever are probably painted bright red. You don't grow strawberries in Illinois in the winter, I don't think, unless I missed that farm. I'm not sure, but yeah. So I agree. I say that all the time. Stay on the outside aisles. Although the local store now has Twinkies on the outside aisle, so you have to you got to jog by them, because I don't think Twinkies are naturally made. But so what are your tips around, back to the gut for a second, on taking good care of your gut, and then how do you avoid the plastics and the Roundup and all that?
You can't really avoid it, but it's really good to cut the amounts down. You don't microwave in plastic. Styrene and styrofoam cups is one of the things that the body has incredible amount of difficulty to detoxify. We're drinking filtered water out of plastic bottles, so that's not good. So, Janet and I have a big reverse osmosis system in our home, and that helps. And even the dogs and cats will choose reverse osmosis over the tap water. So even the dogs and cats have a wisdom.
And we tell them, if you're going to buy bottled water, which, you can't get around all of it, but you can at least make better choices. Look on the bottles and make sure they say filtered with reverse osmosis, and not just, spring water. We've got a place here that would make you think it's coming out of the rolling hills of Colorado, and it's completely clean. And it's coming out of a place here that, I wouldn't put my animal over there to drink that water.
Well, I used to be on a deer lease in that county, and it's like the things went on the deer lease, you wouldn't drink that water anyway.
So why is reverse osmosis so good for you?
For the most part, at least to my understanding, it really does filter out some of the smaller things. It gets all of the cyst and things like that, but it will filter out about 99.9% of the fluoride and the chlorine. And I understand why they use that to be a disinfectant, but, the chlorine-based pesticides are one of the biggest causes of cancers. And there's so many of them. And that 5-MTHFR gene, we're talking about genetic expression being altered just by what's in the GI tract. So it's very important that you take probiotics, and they're not all the same.
And not from yogurt.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
good
exactly.
to learn. It's really good to learn to ferment your own also. But yeah, some of the yogurts, like, yeah, it's a big falsehood. And yeah, I've listened to one guy that was an FDA inspector that said there was one brand of yogurt that claimed they had a particular type of probiotic in there that didn't even exist. And, there's a lot of falsehoods and distortions in advertising. Some to advertise, they'll say, well, it's all natural. That doesn't necessarily imply that it's good or that it's pesticide free. So yeah, organic and at the farmer's market, if you know your farmer and you know how they raise their animals and grow their crops, that helps a lot.
Gut health also, a big thing that we give people are digestive enzymes, which are not probiotics. A lot of people think that that's the same thing. The probiotics are good bacteria for the gut, where the digestive enzymes help you break the foods down. The problem with most of them is that they're plant-based, so they don't break down the meats. We've got one that we use here that we really like that has ox bile in it. That
has enough lipase to help with the fats, protease, and a little bit of hydrochloric acid.
And it mimics human digestion, so it helps you break the foods down, and you'll know it works because it stops the gas, bloating, and belching.
So, when you talk about your hospital and your conventional docs, do they notice that there's a great increase in say gastrointestinal problems in children, failure to thrive and, colic and throwing up their formula and things like that?
That's a good question. I think that most doctors just kind of treat the patient as they come. It's more of, I look at the doctors, and we have great doctors. I say that all the time, but
right.
They kind of do the typical physical, and if you have a problem, they'll treat it. And there's not a lot of focus on what we're talking about here today about let's get down to the root cause of the problem. I think our medical community, we just treat the problem. And,
they're too busy.
Oh, they're so busy.
Most of the ones I know.
Yeah, they're so busy. And, where 20 years ago you would have the doctor would sit with you and actually would come to your house at, 30 years ago. And now it's, they get exactly whatever it is, 6 minutes to see a patient, and then they got to go to the chart and spend a lot of time staring at the computer. And it's really changed the way, medicine is. I've interviewed several doctors, and, they say we had one course in nutrition in med school. They have no idea about nutrition. And that's why I think it's so complementary, the two approaches.
They're getting more and more cooperative. It's amazing the ones, the medical doctors that say, well, okay, you don't have insurance, go to Doctor's Nutrition, get your lab, because we'll do it so inexpensively. And, we have some doctors that say, well, you need olive leaf extract, you need vitamin D, and you need K2, and they just go on and on. There are some that do that. We have several doctors here that we work with on the thyroid, because sometimes you can cut it with our natural approach, and sometimes you might need Synthroid or Armor or something like that. And I don't know that this is going to happen, but we have a possibility of going to a pretty large entity and utilize vitamin and mineral supplementation to see if we can decrease ADD, ADHD, anger, aggression, and violent behavior, because there's so much research done by good medical places like Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of Gastroenterology, that says once you get enough of these nutrients, violent behavior or ADD, ADHD can be greatly, greatly diminished. And that's why I'm in favor of probiotics, because they can help you make your own serotonin, which when we give out the supplement that has serotonin or creates serotonin, people come back and say, oh my God, that's the peace of God in a bottle.
Yeah, I think it will take a couple big, well-known health systems to embrace this, and then I think it will start changing. But the other thing that I was going to mention is, the financial incentives are not aligned around prevention. Hospitals and doctors, they all get paid to treat. We're doing some things around trying to prevent illnesses, but until the incentives change, I think it's going to be a slow road. I attended a conference in Colorado. There were several physicians and chiropractors there, and they talked about what they're doing, but it was kind of anti-establishment. It's a movement that is definitely starting, I believe.
If we have the best medical profession in the world, and again, I really believe we do, then why is America so unhealthy? And I try to cut this down to a formula, and this is not original for me, but you have to, number one, remove the toxins, the organisms, that grow that aren't supposed to be there, and the harmful foods, and, that's a podcast all in itself. Then you have to replace digestive enzymes, and then you have to re-inoculate the friendly organisms, which takes a long time to do because of the challenges to these friendly organisms. Then you have to repair the gut leakiness, which can be done with the digestive enzymes and probiotics. And there's so many different ones, like, from Nutrition, Cancer, and the Journal of the Gut, that just talks about fish oil and fiber and how much that actually decreases intestinal permeability. There's so many really good studies, but then again, you can't go to the big box store and get fish oil because some of that fish oil is so polluted where it comes from, and some of it's very oxidized. And you have to know what you're getting. You have to know that it's third-party tested. You have to know that the assay is true. And there's some fake foods, and there's also some fake supplements out there, too.
I want to get back to your supplement line, but for the average listener, what are maybe the top things that they should be doing right now to get a handle on their health? If they're following the typical diet, the typical lack of exercise, what would be like the first steps that you would recommend?
This is probably not where you think it would go. I would try to ask them to find your need behind the need. Why do you want better health? And it's not, people say, well, I want to feel better. Yes, but what else? And when you get them down to the motivation, well, I want to be able to see my 4-year-old graduate high school and get married. And then you have that internal motivation. Again, I think America has become a nation that's addicted to knowledge, but not understanding and wisdom. So I try to get people to say, well, why do you want to get well? And I just talked to a lady before this podcast, and she said, well, I want to live for my grandkids. I said, well, you're 60. You probably have many, many good years left, but you have to get going with it. So get the lab, and that way it takes out a major amount of the guesswork.
There are so many people that come in here that are on medication, especially for diabetes. And when we run their 3-month blood sugar, they're still extremely high. And they say, well, I'm taking the medicine. And I think they think that gives them a flag that says, go ahead and eat whatever you want. I'm taking this medicine now. It's all good. And somehow you need to understand you've got to take personal responsibility for your own health. A pill or drug is going to help, but it's not going to fix the root cause of why. And if you keep putting in the same things, you're going to wind up dying early. I watched my grandfather lose both of his legs to diabetes, and that's genetically in my family. So I take active steps now to eat better and do things that I know will make a difference. And I do keep tabs on my lab, and I make sure I take control of it, because it's not the miracle drug that's going to save you. Yeah,
I agree with both of your points. On the why, you have to have a why, because what I see is people be like, oh, I want to lose weight, and then I said this on previous podcasts, then default is I'm going to go get a chicken breast and some broccoli. And then 2 days later, they're eating cake. And so because they don't have a why, they just want to lose weight. And that's, and it has to be a real why. Like you want to have a good quality of life with your kids or something that's right. Going to motivate you. Don't you think the pharmaceutical industry is so powerful, and, the commercials are you're kind of walking through the tulip field or whatever. And I think we've convinced everybody that you don't have to change anything. Just take a pill, and if it doesn't work, you can take 2.
You talked about going to China. I think the big eye-opener for us when we were in China is how small everyone is there. We were big, and we're not big people. And I think America sees other Americans that large, and they assume that's normal. And unfortunately, we've got a warped sense of what normal is supposed to be. And if they saw people what they were supposed to look like, look at the old pictures of the people back in the olden days, your grandfather and them, the black and white pictures. Those people weren't big.
And you see people that way now, and people automatically assume they're anorexic, bulimic, or have AIDS. And it's like, no, that's what normal should become. Yeah. When we would see an overweight person in China, that was about as rare as having the fat kid 50 years ago, in the class. There was always one, but it was rare. And I think it's the addiction to the carbohydrates. And I appreciate what you do with the low carb thing. It's like, if you'll get away from the government subsidized, wheat, soy, and corn, and start eating something different. If they subsidized, broccoli and cauliflower and good other vegetables, the kale and arugula, then it would get cheap enough that people would begin to consume something that was nutrient dense.
At the very least, cut your portion sizes in half. What they're feeding you now is enough for 2 or 3 meals in one sitting. Dr. Lewis and I, when we go to eat, and I guess people think we're cheap. I don't know, but there is no way we can eat that kind of quantity that they put on the plate.
We share a meal and then leave about of the half that we have. We usually leave some of that sitting because it's like, I don't want to eat that much.
Right.
Well, yeah, just the McDonald's portion sizes. What is now a kid's meal used to be the main meal. The small little paper package of fries, that used to be the normal fries. Now you get a large and it's like, I don't even know, a pound of fries or something. It's crazy. I mean, you're right. It's crazy. And I'm turning 50 this year, and you're right though. When I was in school, there was maybe one overweight kid. That was it. And now if there's one kid that's normal size, he's
the odd one.
Yeah, it's such a crazy turn of events for sure. Well, we're kind of running out of time, but I do want to get back to your supplements because it sounds like you have a really high quality line of supplements. And if you would, you've kind of mentioned a few parts of it, but why are they so high quality?
Well, because I have a guy that's smarter than me in chemistry, and he will not accept anything but the absolute very best.
That's the doctor's nutrition line.
Yeah. And, we do have some other lines that are pharmaceutical grade. Why are they better? Because, I don't know, we just won't compromise. If there's, we had our Andro build the other day. It came in to the original doctor's nutrition and said, it tested like there was a tiny bit of gluten in the deer velvet antler. It's like, well, there shouldn't be any gluten at all, but we didn't package it up. We're going for totally gluten free. So you just don't compromise because what you put into the temple of the Holy Spirit does matter. And I'm sorry if I offend people with that term, but that's the way I look at it.
And the products we have here are generally 3 to 5 times stronger than what you're buying over the counter. We have some companies here that won't allow us to just advertise our products online without them making an account because they want to make sure that person is a customer of ours and we've counseled them on how to take the product because it is strong enough to actually move lab values. And some people don't need the things they think they need without having a consultation with the doctor. That's why we run the lab, and cortisol, one of the big ones on there for stress. So many people think, well, I'm tired. I need something to help me out and jack me up. Well, we've got things that do that, but sometimes they're way over. Their cortisol's too high. They actually need it calmed down. So without lab, you don't really know which way to go, and the stuff's just not safe for them to take without knowing.
And it takes a pretty fair amount of nutrition for a pretty fair amount of time before your body can make those physiological changes.
Tell us about how we can get a hold of you if somebody wants to begin this lab process and get a consult with you and look at your supplements. How can they reach you?
They can go to our website, that's ACUT above naturals with an S on the end.com. There you will see a health survey that's at the top. We ask you to fill that out first because it comes right to Dr. Lewis, and he likes to look at it and evaluate what he thinks you need. We have the different lab panels there, and if you have recent lab, you can send that. He doesn't charge for any of that. He gives away his time, which he's running out of, but he does give it away.
I stay behind, but we kind of make it happen. If somebody wants to get well, we make sure we give enough of ourselves to make it happen.
They can also call us, but we generally ask them to fill out the health survey first. That way we know what medications they're taking because we don't want to interfere with anything they're on. And we want to know, surgeries and that kind of thing, what's going on with them and what they're looking to achieve.
Yeah, family history.
So is this available anywhere? So it'd just be a local lab would draw it? Is that how it works?
Right. They fill out the health survey, and then what we do is figure out, we use Quest Lab.
Which is everywhere, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
And in Texas we use LabCorp.
Which is everywhere.
Right, right. And generally there's one very close to them, and we figure out which one's close to them, and they draw the lab for us, and then the results come back to us. So then we are able to go over it with anybody anywhere in the United States.
Do you do telephone or Skype, or how does that work?
Telephone. We do telephone. I email them everything that Dr. Lewis wants them to have, so they have a printout of everything. They have access to all of their lab records. So it's one-on-one without actually being here, but we try to compensate for that in other ways.
And then if somebody wants to work with you long-term, then they could hire you to do that?
Right.
Okay.
A lot of people do. You know, we tell people with nutrition, it takes a minimum of 3 months to start getting well. And it's not our law. It's God's law. It takes 3 months to make changes in the body. And then it's a month for every year you've been sick. And that's how long you look at getting well.
Well, that kind of gives them a reality check that it's not going to be fixed in 3 weeks, something that's been going on for 30 years. And I hear this from the conventional doctors. They say, you know, these guys want me to pull off a miracle with some pill after they've abused their body for 40 years. And it's like, we try to give them, some reason to be realistic.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, any other points you want to share?
Well, you just find a reason for living. There's a difference between living and existing. And I tell people death is not wrong. We're all going to die. But I think the biggest sin in life is being here and not really living while we're here. So, there's a reason for that. And, I try to dig deep into, well, you got to love yourself to do it, or you have to have a spiritual reason, or you have to do it for your spouse. And I take more supplements out of respect and love of Janet. Of course, she gives me digestive enzymes, and I wonder if that's not so she can avoid the gas bloating and belching later. I don't know.
Well, that is her why.
I do it out of love.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great advice. Well, we
try to make it fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's such a great service you're doing. And I think it's a great service that you have with these labs, because for those that, haven't went to a hospital, they're very, very expensive. And so this is an alternative that people can afford, and they can get a handle on their health.
That's it. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so cool. Well, Dr. Lewis and Janet, thank you so much. Skyping in from Texas, this has been a very interesting podcast, and we will link everything in the show notes to your website, and hopefully people will reach out and get some of these tests started.
Good. We appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and keep doing what you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for being with us today, and we hope that you are on the road to your successful low-carb lifestyle. Become a leader in your health and a leader in life. Check us out at www.thelowcarbleader.com. And remember to join Dan again next time on the Low Carb Leader Podcast.